the one constant in 40k? It can always get worse. And it will. Fending off the Tyrannid assault should have worked, even when hamstrung by the very people we were trying to defend. The fleet did its job, massacring Tyrannids by the billion, while the ground troops fought valiantly to protect the western perimeter, the area found between the capital and the nearest mountains. We had stone walls 10 meters high, with Titans and Knights firing in support, then attack drones and interceptors in the air, plus corvettes and drop cruisers proving low-orbit fire support. In places, the wall was 10 meter thick as well, to allow tanks to provide heavy weapon fire in support of the artillery. Armed sentinels and tarantula turrets, even the less impressive maned saber-gun platforms added torrents of medium-grade las cannon and autocannon towards those tyrannid organisms that managed to reach the surface of Cardinal World. But those damned Grey Knights. It was almost like they wanted to be the cause of the fall of Shadowbrink. The poor Hive City had one exposed flank, and not enough firepower to halt the Tyrannids at the gates. Millions of lesser organisms, supported by zoanthropes and maleceptors, smashed their way inside the Hive City, and began feasting on the locals, despite feeble attempts by the Grey Knights to resist. So I ordered 10 corvettes on a sacrificial run, and crash-landed them, to form a wall of armor and firepower on the east side of Rosov. Their iridium tungsten armored hulls were taller than the defense walls, and the broadsides of las cannons and point defense turrets were able to fire on both sides, halting the progress of the Tyrannids and creating a wall of fire to support the misguided locals. And then, the inevitable fuck-up began, as one of those ancient relics called the Maelstrom Cradle, began to activate by itself and opened a portal into the warp, right underneath the Hive City. The cretins did not bother with Gellerfields, and soon the city was infested with both Tyrannids and demons. Lord Pef, we detect a major chaos incursion to the east, where the Hive City is. We do not have defenses covering that sector. The perimeter is compromised, General Regina announced in a wary voice. I cursed inward, while focusing on an alternate solution. Acknowledged, General. Stand by for extraction. I replied on the Vox channel, and instantly did that. 3 billion people vanished from the face of the planet, including everything of value that I could grab. My troops and equipment, including the modular rock walls, their tanks and titans and everything else recoverable. Even a pair of Grey Knight Dreadknights and all their squads, dead or alive, were stored into the Tesseract as well. And then I began retrieving animals and tools, weapons and munitions, while also stealing away all the relics and machinery from the planet, ancient and new. In a minute, the deserted planet was fought on only by demons and Tyrannids, while I deposited the last million bioships right on the ground, around the fallen capital. The space was clear and my ships returned to their carriers, while the fleet moved away, followed by the last Cobra destroyers of the defenders. And then, I sat up from my command chair and returned the leader of the Grey Knights right on my bridge. Name and rank, Astartes, I demanded in a cold voice. The silver-armored librarian looked around, to find a dozen blank lamenters staring at him with angry eyes, and a blonde inquisitor playing with a ball of arcane lightning, flipping it in the air with one hand. I am Brother Librarian Cadolan. This is your Blackstone Fortress, Lamenter? He replied with his own question. He appears to be sentient, Lord Pef. I thought you said the Grey Knights are mindless robots. Amberly commented with a wry voice. I smiled widely at her, then turned towards the idiot Psyker, all wrapped in purity sigils and sanctity runes. And before that, Librarian? What name were you born with? On what world, and what year? I asked in a gentler voice. That's irrelevant. I am now Cadolan, the Hammer of the Emperor, the Psyker declared, sounding proud. What you mean, is that your identity has been erased. What is your chain of command, Astartes? I continued in a soft voice, while holding a palm flat towards the floor. My sons lowered their weapons, as ordered. The librarian glanced around with suspicion, finding only blanks around him and his psycho powers ineffective should it come to blows. My Grand Master, and above him the Ordo Malleus of the Holy Inquisition. Above that, the Supreme Grand Master of the chapter, and finally the Emperor of Mankind himself. The man claimed, looking around for some way to escape. I see. So there is basically nobody to punish you for doing what you did. Or so you think, Librarian Cadolan. You will be taken to Terra to answer for your crimes, and if you're lucky you'll be burned on the Astronomicon. If that's not possible, I'll request you be turned into a pariah instead. Very useful gift that one, right? I asked rhetorically while turning around towards the holoscreen. Inquisitor Vale, it appears Shadowbrink has been infested with demons and tyrannids. I propose exterminatus. I spoke in a level voice. More and more tyrannids and demons emerged from their bioships and war portal, battling each other in a massive concert of claws and wings and psycho spells. She stepped beside me to observe the magnified images. Indeed, Lord Pef. It appears our efforts to save this imperial planet had been obstructed by this librarian. Having his soul fuel the Astronomicon should be the appropriate penance. Amberly mused in a thoughtful tone. Cadolan let out a grunt, while watching the same scene. This is what I tried to prevent. But the seals overloaded during the Tyrannid assault. Of course. I am not claiming you're a traitor, Grey Knight. I am saying my troops could have protected the Hive City just fine, and yet you refused. Not only that, but you failed to protect the Hive City, letting the Tyrannids breach its walls and massacre millions of civilians, thereby activating the Cradle Relic with their deaths and blood. But the good news is Primarch Sanguinius has returned, and now rules the Imperium of Man as its regent. You'll have the chance to explain yourself to him, before he decides your fate. I answered in a casual voice. Worlds were lost to the Imperium every day, and at least this time I had managed to recover most of the locals. Sure, there was still plenty of fanatic militia and preachers on the surface, all of them in fact. They kept the enemy distracted, and even killed some of them. Something big is coming through, Lord Pef. 1, 2, 3, 4 greater demons. The Inquisitor proclaimed with a deep frown, the grainy picked images from our landed corvettes distorting even more, once the big demons crossed into real space. I doubt they'll be effective against the Tyrannids, not while the Shadow in the Warp suppresses their powers. I commented in a lighter tone, like watching a sports event. The Grey Knight Librarian was not amused at all, falling to his knees in prayer, and mumbling to himself something about the dreaded quadrifold abominatum. I almost think you want them to win, just so you can kill them yourself with your fancy lance. Amberly grumbled while sitting down to watch the match. Zoantropes and Maleceptors bombarded the greater demons with psychic spells, while Tyrannovexes and Trigons advanced to battle them in melee. It was a battle of titans, and I almost felt the urge to jump into my knight and join the fight. Almost. One-on-one, with pariah shields supporting me was one thing. I was nearly certain to defeat a single greater demon, with my own. But a giant melee of billions of enemies would be hard to navigate, even with all my abilities and cheats. All I could do was watch and learn what my enemies could do, and deposit more and more Tyrannids on the ground. Despite their terrific powers as great demons, when faced with the Tyrannid silence and their own psychic spellcasters, the demons weren't faring that great, and sneaky plasma torpedoes demolishing their demonic supporters didn't help either. One of the greater demons, a bluish bird, decided to retreat towards the cradle, but I wasn't keen on letting that happen. 40 Tyrannid zoantropes teleported right in front of it, while a pair of Trigon biotitans fell right on top of the cowardly greater demon. A howl of despair followed, and then the greater demon blew up under the concentrated assault. The other 3 greater demons fought on, butchering millions of Tyrannids with plagues and blunt force alike. But the thing about Tyrannids? They adapt to whatever enemy they face. Stronger biotitans appeared, with larger claws and bone swords, ignoring the green vapors of plague and disease, and chopping and slicing at the demons with impunity. I wanted those adapted Tyrannids for my own special army and for extensive biologist tech priests examinations. New vaccines could be prepared by studying what the hive mind did to adapt, and one day humanity would have those kinds of immunities as well. As for those Grey Knight's weapons, like a Gatling silencer, or a heavy psycannon, well, surely Trizin would be amenable to reverse engineer them for me. And I bet he did not have a Grey Knight in his collection either. Humanity might have lost this world, but I will make sure we came ahead for it. The Grey Knights foolishly kept their anti-chaos weapons as a tight secret, when all the Imperium could use them and withstand chaos with some degree of success. Even if only the Forge Worlds and the Astartes chapters had psycannons it would be great, but the Adeptus Sororitas had 1,000,000 times more available troops. Soon enough, The last greater demon was shredded and sent back to warp in tiny pieces by the Tyranids, and I got to burn yet another world. Not before I collected the Tyrannid Biotitans I wanted, plus my well-deserved share of metallic asteroids and everything of value I could steal. My stores of torpedoes and Nova shells were empty once again, and I had billions of people to resettle or convert into productive servitors for my own forged worlds. And even better, this cardinal world had 9 trillion thrones in its treasure vaults, a sum so immense it would be hard to spend. Nobody could sell me 9,000 torpedo destroyers or several battleships. Oh well. I guess I could increase the children's support program in my empire, plus purchase anything nice. I was rich. 2 weeks later, we returned to Machine Forge to some well-needed rest and repair. My ships were battered and scoured with craters and scars, the crew had seen more combat than an entire Segmentum battle fleet, and our regiments were on the brink of mental and physical exhaustion. I would have to rotate the troops, and send these people back on their colony worlds. Injured auxiliary troopers would need bionic limbs and organs, and all of their equipment would need an entire year to refurbish and upgrade. However, there was some good news too, as more Mechanicus ships had arrived with Manufactorum ships, even the promised one from Forge Cypramundi with the Nova Cannon experts. The Coven of Ordo Xenos Inquisitors was back in force, a dozen new women escorting the 6 ladies I had close ties with. I could guess what they wanted, simply by noting their eyes measuring my body like a piece of prime meat. My ladies, and honored guests, I hope you have found the Machine Forge to your liking, I offered as I gestured towards the full table. I was rich now, and could afford to offer any and all delicacies available on the market. We have found this place very welcoming, Lord Lancefire. But generous table aside, we need your aid to complete our duties. Protection from psychers and chaos corruption, elite troops as bodyguards and enforcers, and advanced weapons and scanners to combat Xenos with same level of firepower and ability. A middle-aged woman explained with a level voice. I measured the woman with curious eyes. She wore a revealing dress which emphasized a generous bust and a belt filled with exotic weaponry and other devices. I see you have quite the arsenal already, Lady Inquisitor. Eldar weapons, digital weapons, conversion shield and psych-out grenades. I suppose some power armor could help though, I replied demurely. The woman grit her teeth at my fake idiocy. I once had to marry the scumbag governor of Hive World Necromunda, just to reach his inner circle to investigate. Not the most pleasant job I had. She grumbled while pushing her breasts even higher. Don't make me beg to join your bed, rogue trader, she continued in a dignified voice. The other women blushed and looked at me under long eyelashes, while Ambly snorted in amusement. The news spread fast, Pef. It would seem your body is a high-prized commodity in certain circles, she commented in a right tone. I see. I don't mind a few more lovers, esteemed ladies. I can indeed help you all greatly, with knowledge and artifacts and troop support, plus access to my personal intelligence agency and various Mechanicus projects that investigate Xenos species and weapons. Even your own blank children and null rods to aid you against psychers or demons. However, there is the reverse of the coin to consider, I replied in a stern tone, while my eyes turned cold. Lady Adriel nodded gently at my words. I already explained that, Pef. You do not tolerate traitors, no matter their station. Especially inquisitors. I chewed on the crispy grox meat as my eyes focused on each of the new women. Then I sipped some wine to clear my throat. As long as we're clear. I have killed greater demons and inquisitors alike, plus corrupted priests and tech priests, chaos space marines and traitor primarchs. Plots and cabals formed inside the Imperium's leaders have caused more damage than any Xeno invasion. But here in the Eastern Fringe, I have complete power over everyone. We may lack the light of the Astronomicon, but I can still reach anyone that disobeys me and crush them. Can I study the Catan? A thin red-haired inquisitor asked in a soft voice. I locked on her with a glare. Learn from him, you mean? The Catan are billions of years old, and they are much stronger than any creature we can imagine. Their knowledge of the universe and technology is quite near the limit of everything possible, and it doesn't involve the warp at all. And unlike the Necrons, their memories are not lost due to stasis and age. I explained in a warning voice, then sipped more wine. As you say, Lord Lancefire. It would seem you hold the Catan in great respect. she replied with a right tone. The mighty Zohulash inside the Pharos is a mere shard, a broken Catan, not even 1,000th of his full power. But even so, if free, Zohulash could lay waste to a galactic sector with ease. Even I am not yet his equal, and that should tell you everything, my lady, I said with a pained sigh, and continued my meal in silence. The woman glanced at Adriel for confirmation, at which the brunette inquisitor replied with a shrug. If Pef says it is so, it is probably worse. He tends to classify all enemies into killable right now or killable later. And you read his kill list already, a list which is very likely not complete. I grinned genially and brought Canis beside me to treat him some expensive meat. And what list would that be, Lady Adriel? Someone is writing my life's achievements in a diary? I asked at random, while petting the space wolf on its curious snout. Beside me, Amberly chopped on her wine by accident. Woof. Woo? Canis inquired with a discerning gaze over my new harem. Yes, my loyal friend. These bitches want more puppies, and you'll get to play with the kids too. Maybe you can take them out on a jungle world, to train? I mused in a thoughtful tone. Canis snatched an entire bird from the table and masticated with gusto. Grr. Moo. Woof. He replied after a minute. Fine. You'll get more fried birds. Now run along and visit your own lady friends, I commanded with a gesture towards the door. In a flash, the Fenrisian wolf turned and sped away, faster than a race car. My name is Inquisitor Jenna_Orchiel, Lord Lancefire. I hope we can become friends too, one day. The first black-haired woman proposed while holding her crystal glass high. I smiled politely and raised my glass as well. Yes, Lady Jenna. I believe we will. Some time later, I got the busty woman to beg for me to stop, eyes glazed with lust and ecstasy. Tired already, sweet Jenna? It has only been 2 hours. I asked in fake naivety as I turned and let the woman rest on my chest. It was great, but I'm not so young anymore. Would you be interested in meeting my daughter, Milda? She is aboard my spaceship now, but I'm training her to become an Inquisitor as well, Jenna murmured in a soft voice. A mother/daughter pair, in my bed? Now this would be interesting indeed. I suppose I can sacrifice myself and accept your daughter too, my dear. But you better stay and provide maternal support. I'm on a tight schedule and cannot waste time on romancing girls, as sad as it sounds, I demanded in a generous voice. Let me take a shower and talk it over with her, Lady Jenna asked in a less cheerful voice. Probably not expecting my shameless demand, but I really didn't have time for a prolonged romance. This was a fucking duty, and they'll probably depart as soon as they had what they came for. Only I didn't mind too much, as a threesome would do wonders for my spirit. An hour later, Jenna returned with a shy Milda while I took my own shower and replenished lost fluids. Lord Lancefire, I'm willing to. The girl stammered while avoiding my eyes. Cheer up, my dear. This will be actually pleasant and your mother is here to keep you safe. Just close your eyes, and follow my voice, I whispered as I drew away the bedsheet. Unlike her mother, Milda was not experienced in bed, but we made it work anyway. A couple of hours later, I had the pair moaning under me, as they embraced each other with sweaty skin and dreaming eyes. They were spent and exhausted though, so I sent them to sleep in a nearby room. We'll resume the duty tomorrow, as I had more women to enjoy. I paired one old and one new lovers together, starting with Adriel and the red-haired inquisitor called Dolores. Despite their tremendous willpower, I managed to lay them low a few hours later and we fell asleep in a sweet haze of endorphins and sated lust. Then next day, I woke up to find my wife Dayancita, the young Titan princeps in my room, examining the scene with curious eyes. Lord Pef. Look, I'm all grown up now, and my breasts are big too. Zeta proclaimed and opened her robes to prove her statement. The girl had grown nicely indeed, having transformed into a busty beauty with the passage of time and healthy eating. More than a decade had passed since I last saw her, and she was now a promising woman and a decent Titan pilot. Probably scheduled to pilot the other Emperor class in the Titan Legion, given that my wife had escorted her to my bed. My lord husband, you like what a delicious morsel I've found for you? Lady Day asked in a wry voice, while also disrobing herself. I nodded kindly. You're the best, my dear wife. How should I reward you? I replied in a teasing voice, as my spear sprang up for battle. She told me and I grinned in victory. Day was a great wife indeed. On Oliva, most of the current locals have never seen me, new generations replacing the old and only my extended family benefiting from life extension gifts. Even so, the use of the rare chronophage blades was restricted to blanks and pariahs. The rich nobles and merchant had sufficient fortunes to prolong their lives with rejuvenate treatments, while my soldiers and scribes supporting the Lancefire dynasty received better food and medication, which gave them a fairly long service time of about a century. Construction of new hive cities had progressed quite nicely, with 3 new cities dug underground, and the zero hive formed of blanks had grown to encompass the whole valley, with suburbs sprawling outward already. Granted, every single blank man had a large harem of his own, with hundreds of concubines pumping babies out as fast as humanly possible. It was time for Phase 2, unleashing most of these blank men into the colonies and mixing the genes with the Katakans once more. Most of them were rather useless to the Astartes' training, since only my bloodline had a fair chance of surviving the gene seed implantation. Instead, I could provide them with administrative and commanding positions in the local governments, especially in hive cities of Oliva and Natale, and on Salvation, my own cardinal world. 1 million such men, and I could be fairly sure there will be no warp corruption and a rather more skilled leadership, since the Zero Hive had a formidable schooling system. The influx of immigrants had continued as well, the vast majority being young women imported as reparations and tithes for my ships and troops' actions to rescue their home worlds, or as indentured servants bartered by various Forge worlds in exchange for STC templates and again military aid. The rest of the immigrants were PDF and guard regiments, or skilled technicians and scribes provided as colonization support. Veteran troops made the best colonists, because this has always worked, since the days of the Roman Empire. Katakan regiments were ever better, but I was reaching the limit of possible requisition there, after stealing away more than half of that planet's trading stock. But Cadian and Valhallan regiments weren't that bad either, and the dangers of a new colony were sometimes equal with those of a battlefield. From predators and hostile natives, to harsh environments and poor infrastructure, colonizing and exploiting a new world was never easy. It sounds far-fetched, but even the Katakans sometimes had problems with Titan-sized saurians and swarms of flesh-eating locusts. I had to visit a dozen of problem-causing worlds and help out, either by eradicating certain species or using them as target practice for the Lamenters and the Tech Marines. As the year had passed, a whole new army had been recruited and trained, 20 armor regiments, 10 artillery and air support and 70 heavy infantry, with a couple of special auxiliary regiments with better gear to provide screening for our knights and titans. Less than 1% of the original troops had stayed as non-coms and officers, while the former troops were given large areas of land and a dozen women each as reward for their service. In 20 years I could expect to raise 5 times more troops without affecting the productivity, simply due to population growth and better education. Already, scouting expeditions were mapping out the nearby stars for the next expansion sphere, the one which would take us from a mere 400-planet kingdom to a 4,000-world star empire. By the third phase in 40 years' time, there should be a sizable power in this area, over 40,000 worlds home to a quadrillion people. And by the next century, well, we shall see if we reach that far. First I had to make sure the Imperium of Man stayed safe, somewhat, and kept the attention of the galactic enemies onto itself, mainly by defending the Forge worlds and cleaning up more Hive worlds. That part already seemed to work fine, as the Primarchs were all glory hounds and genetically predisposed to stir trouble for themselves wherever they went. Thousands of cults and cabals were forming against them, gathering Xenos and traitors into giant conspiracies aimed at placing them in power, restoring the status quo or destroy the Imperium or other combinations. Everything and everyone, from rogue psychers, disgruntled navigators, heretic tech priests and gene-stealer cults, to crazy Eldar and dark Eldar elements, bloodthirsty Necrons and demons, failed inquisitors and corrupted priests and bishops, renegade guard officers and space marines, pirates and corsairs, slavers and mutants, up to entire navy fleets and sector governors, all opposed the Angel Reborn and the Indomitus crusade of his brother Guilliman. Much less so wherever I had reach, with my obsidian auguries and the network of rogue traders, Ordozinos and the Pharos itself. I spent an entire month in the Pharos, scanning the Ultima Segmentum for new opponents and deploying various types of countermeasures, from homemade Tyranidevices to plasma warheads and various canisters of nerve gas or glass transmuting viruses. The tower received another dose of 40k ugly truth, a dozen sept worlds being invaded by demons via new warp rifts, while a couple of new allied Xenos worlds burst into exterminatus flames. That invasion was the last drop, since a couple of Tau septs deployed new weapons against demons, from suppressive force fields of the Earth caste, similar to the Bastion psychic fields I recovered from Vigilus, to blue flame pyro weapons by the Fire caste, probably some type of enhanced Promethean like the Sisters of Battle used. Some Tau battlesuits even had energy blades, crackling with electric arcs as they fought the demonic invaders. They were starting to develop working strategies against this new enemy, but it was far from what I needed. Give them a decade or two and try again. The Tau had also begun expanding vertically, both by enlarging their cities and by exploring towards the upper side of the galaxy, trying to maintain a small print on the planar map while still growing in volume. Smart play, and one I could allow for now, except when heading towards human planets. They had settled a couple of Necron tomb worlds though, which should provide them plenty of high-level technology to study, if they survived. As for the Tyranids, the segmentum was mostly clear right now, except for two, Hive Fleet Kronos advancing from southeast and Hive Fleet Ouroboros in the northeast. Splinters and small Hive fleets still roamed at random, and Hive Fleet Tiamat stood watch in the eastern fringe over the 7 lush worlds of the Tiamat system, without devouring them. I would have to deal with them soon, before the hive mind changed its stance. And after that, I would have to head to Fenris and acquire my last piece of the puzzle. Decision made, I gathered my ships and troops at Forge Machine and sent an astropathic call to a couple of important women to meet me at Fenris in a few months. However, things rarely go as planned. The Tyranid hive at Tiamat was a strange breed, able to use massive psychic waves and resist most Imperial weapons, including lasers and bolters due to a diamond-hard chitin covering both their ground troops and the bioships. It took me 2 months of hard work using the Blackstone Fortress and the Immaterium beam to reduce the hive fleet and collect their corpses for later use. On the other hand, their bio-titans that I managed to capture and mind control were amazingly durable, and their bone claws so sharp they could slice tank armor without any difficulty. Tens of thousands of tech priests and engineers aboard the Black Lament began the painstaking work of repurposing that unique chitin into extra armor for my units, using power weapons and their cutting fields as impromptu tools. Luckily I did have a giant store of such weapons in my Tesseract, since I had been collecting relics for a century. However, by the time my fleet arrived at Fenris it was almost too late. A giant fleet of Dark Angels and other chapters, aided by the Imperial Navy and also Knights and Titans, were preparing the siege of the Fenris system, and the eradication of the Space Wolves Astartes chapter. Hello there. I spoke on the Voxcaster, not really impressed by the rock and all the potential enemies. They had a giant fortress, but so did I. They had a giant Gloriana battleship, but so did our Knights and Titans, warships and army regiments. I had all of them as well. Lord Lancefire, have you come to help us rid the Imperium of these mutated Marines? A familiar voice asked in return. The Lion Primarch himself, and not wearing the null rod I gifted him. Even worse, his Vox officer was a demon in disguise, the Changeling. Any warning I would try to give him over Vox would arrive subtly distorted. Of course, Primarch. I will arrive on the rock momentarily, I replied and immediately teleported along the Vox beam inside the bridge. Say whatever about the man, but damn he was big. He made even normal Astartes look small, and I wasn't yet at that size anyway. Still growing, but very slow. I imagined you'd be taller, Lamenta. The lion uttered with faint amusement. I just smiled kindly, and placed a null wand in the hand he offered. And I imagined you'd be smarter, Lion. Since you are handicapped by a lack of blank genes, it should be obvious to protect yourself and your captains with warp-resistant artifacts. Case in point, this demon right here, influencing you and your crew with lies and deceit. I explained, pointing at the disguised demon and firing a single phase iron bolt into its knee from my shoulder bolter. The creature distorted and screamed in agony, as the disguise fell apart and a creature of warp and nightmare appeared instead, beaks and wings fluttering about as it tried to flee. In a flash, the Primarch swung his wolf-blade and sliced the demon into a dozen bits, which then began to evaporate back into the warp. But I wasn't going to let the changeling escape. My own weapon struck without having to display any dueling talent, the demon lance meandering about to impale and drain each fragment of the enemy, then reverted back to its normal shape and vanished back into its tesseract prison. Handicapped, you say? Lionel Johnson muttered while holding the null wand like a poisonous toothpick. I do remember gifting you a null rod as well. No doubt lying unsed in Armory 7 along with those STC templates. Then again, you never learned how to read, did you? I grumbled in disappointment as I retrieved the unsed gifts from the same armory, and held them in my hands as proof. His dark angels growled in response to my insults, standing around their Primarch like guard dogs. I did read the schematics for those devices, Lord Lancefire. There just hasn't been any time to make use of them, with constant battles everywhere. I don't have a private forge world either, the lion said in a softer voice, possibly a bit sad to lose those gifts. I shrugged and scanned the rock for more hidden treasures. The Dark Angels were certainly rich, if they afforded to keep a dozen vaults under lock, filled with amazing archaeotech relics. They will need them soon enough. Magnus will arrive soon, with his thousands of sons. Stop murdering Imperial citizens and focus on the real enemy, Primarch. My patience is limited, unlike my authority, I said and vanished from his home without any sign of warp teleport. Time to deal with the space wolves and their Canis Helix problem. And perhaps find some she-wolves mates for Canis. I arrived at the Fang, the gigantic fortress spire on Fenris with a wolf at my side, and gave a toothy grin to the space wolf scouts guarding the armored door. Do they smell tasty, Canis? I asked my loyal companion. Canis advanced and smelled the startled space wolves, and their wolfish companions, and grinned back at me. Woo? Yes Canis, they all have the Canis Helix gene, just like you do. But sure, you can have fun with the grey bitch if you want. This meeting will take some time, I explained patiently. My wolf didn't need to be told twice, as he rapidly mounted and subdued the Fenrisian wolf female, to the amusement of the guards. A lamenter with a wolf at his side. Yes, there is only one of you in the entire galaxy I suspect, Lord Lancefire, the guarding scout said after examining me for a long minute. And such a good friend as well, my loyal Canis. So, who is around for a friendly chat? Ulrich, most likely? I asked rhetorically. The scout glanced upwards at the spire then back at me. You were expected, Lord Lancefire. The wolf priest has also promised not to bite you, this time. He replied with a wolfish grin that showed elongated canines. Well, Ulrich was a potent psyker, possibly even beta level. I stepped forward and arrived in the reception room, laden with wolf furs and bones. It seemed a bit creepy, to use the remains of past companions like this, but space wolves were a different breed of space marines anyway. Treat them like dogs instead of men, and they'll even like you for it. I hope you have food, Ulrich. Even wolf meat will do. I began while holding my arms apart for a hug. The priest laughed and stepped to embrace me like a long-lost brother. A small brother. Yes. You need to grow up faster, Lamenter. Perhaps help us bring back Russ, one day too. Soon enough, a table was set up and more space wolves arrived, including Harold_Deathwolf, the man who gifted me Canis on Forge Riser. So you dealt with the Lion Primarch, rogue trader? The giant man asked me with a smirk and a knowing glance at the ceiling. Not really, no. There was a demon on board the rock, urging the Dark Angels to murder you all, in revenge for the death of their brothers. Plus, by attacking you they would have weakened your defenses, enough to allow a major chaos incursion in the system. I've dealt with that demon, I explained in a grave tone. The space wolves looked at each other with some worry. A chaos incursion, we could use your help, Lamenter. You are all blanks, right? Immune to warp. I nodded in reply, and held my hand out to unfold a fistful of null wands for those present. These nullification devices should help against direct psyker attacks by sorcerers and demon princes. Still, Gallifield's and Blackstone armor would be needed to keep everyone safe, if that's even possible. I'll try to defend Hive World Midgardia, if you'll let me. Ulrich frowned visibly at the null wands, possibly annoyed with their very existence. I notice some doubt in your explanation, Lord Lancefire. Are these small null rods less potent? I took out the classic null rod that I recovered from the rock and held it out to Wolf Lord Deathwolf. A quick test revealed that the null wands made by Yoakero were twice as strong, resisting anything the wolf priest could conjure as a psycho assault, unlike the null rod made by the Mechonicus. I think I'll take the small rod, if that's okay. I rather not have my beard singed if a chaos sorcerer throws warp lightning at me. The bearded space wolf muttered as he exchanged the device and fit the null wand into his belt. These devices are still external aids, brothers. What works against a beta-level psyker or demon is not enough against alpha levels. And if Magnus himself arrives, well, not even genetic blanks will be safe then. Alpha plus powers can only be countered by negative omega pariahs. A rare breed, such potent people, and hunted by everyone in the galaxy, I disclosed with a sad voice. Ulrich measured me with wise eyes, and then glanced at the sky, searching among the Lamenta fleet for such a rare person. As if I would reveal my trump cards to everyone, by allowing Ordella and Decima to travel outside the labyrinth. My few Omega-level pariahs would terrify the astropaths in the entire star system, and alert every single psyker to their presence. You have silent sisters on board every single ship in your fleet, plus blank captains and bridge crew. Thousands of blanks and hundreds of sisters. The wolf priest spoke to everyone, letting them know I've come prepared. I smiled gently at him, and nodded. The sanguineous gene seed gives rise to mutations as well, going from growing claws and fangs, to immense bouts of rage and a thirst for blood. But, there is a nice side effect for having blank genes. Since mutations are warp-based, the blank recruits are immune. Even the Black Rage syndrome has vanished. The thirst for blood still lingers though, but we hadn't had a need for a death company anymore. Wolf Lord Harold glared at me for a second, echoed in tandem by his ice-tooth companion Wolf. So this is about the Wolfen, after all. I shrugged in a casual gesture. Your chapter and your problem, brother. I could be convinced to allow 100 of my blank sons to join you, and prove themselves as a valid stock for incorruptible space wolves. Perhaps after the battle, once you need more recruits and your chapter master returns as well. The officers present glanced at each other in silence. I believe it is time to awaken our dreadnoughts then. Harold, you and your company join the Lamenters on Midgardia. If the Thousand Suns come, a hive world would be the prime target for their foul rituals. Ulrich the Slayer commanded in a rough voice, with subtle undertones of violence and mayhem in the low timbre. I did not have wolf genes, but I have heard Canis use the same type of warning sometimes. Especially when I petted his puppies. Or my own children, if left in his care. By next week, my tech priests were hard at work installing bastion fields and Gela generators on Midgardia, although the defenses were greatly simplified by the hive cities being buried deep underground. Thousands of new PDF regiments were being hastily raised and trained, then given defensive bunkers and sealed gates to protect. Ferrocrete and Blackstone plates were being assembled into new fortifications, both on the toxic surface and the access ways into the hive cities, while millions of new servitors were being converted from the local criminal gangs. Meanwhile, I abused the Tesseract to increase orbital presence with more defense forts and armed asteroids, mounting some tarantula turrets for point defense as well, although their Gela fields and the hidden torpedo tubes drilled into the asteroids would be quite sufficient. Expecting another debacle like at Agrippina may seem paranoid, but nevertheless I ordered my fleet carriers to retreat a couple of light years away in deep space, once their payload of corvettes and starfighters have been launched. The carriers were still in range of our FT transceivers, in case I needed to recall them urgently. I'm not sure what Primarch Johnson thought of my moves, but I really didn't care much. I was more interested in the world of Fenris itself, and its strange inhabitants. From giant mammoths to oversized white bears and Fenrisian wolves, feral elks and badgers, up to real dragons flying on thermal currents, then spaceship-sized kraken monsters inhabiting the deep oceans, and lastly the cavern cities and their mutated night-gangers, worshipping chaos gods and using archaeotech artifacts as maces and axes. I extracted thousands of specimens of these amazing animals, keeping a balance as to not cause a famine by kidnapping too many elks and not enough bears. I could populate some fringe worlds with these beasts and provide my lamenters with a constant source of training and protein. However, a dozen plasma warheads arrived inside the largest krakens, burning them alive from inside out. I kinda suspected those were feral tyrannid biotitans that were left behind by some failed invasion. I took a couple of smaller specimens to give the biologist Magi something to investigate, and by next day they all agreed. The crazy space wolves cohabited their planet with giant tyrannids and didn't even know it. Sure, the space wolves hunted the krakens for their diamond-like claws and teeth, but never in a concentrated effort to eradicate them. But should a tyrannid hive fleet arrive in this system, the space wolves would have a major problem, being assaulted by kilometers-long organisms rising from their own oceans at the command of the hive mind. As for the night gangers, they visited the wolf's eye for a short second, before being burned into space dust by the system's sun. The cavern cities had been constructed from the remains of the first colonization ships, and were filled with ancient devices, some mundane and other rather priceless. The ship's bridge was quite intact, and filled with a treasure trove of logic vaults and data stacks, everything from maps and weapon schematics to movies and songs and poetry. I'll have to copy everything and distribute it among my tech priests and family, although the broken ship reactor and the immersive radiation had damaged most storage devices. But even fragmentary data was better than nothing, and I suspected some of the devices in the Fang were also extracted from these old caverns. But now they were locked tight and forgotten, of course. Perhaps only the old dreadnoughts recalled their existence now. Bjorn had been a contemporary of Lehman Russ and had led the Space Wolves after the Primarch departed for the Eye of Terror, on some kind of penitent crusade. I wasn't sure why all the Primarch had chosen to abandon their duties, since they certainly haven't managed to find and kill their traitor brothers in the depths of the Warp Rift. I had an inkling the silly Primarchs were all captured and made to fight in a giant arena for the amusement of Khorne. It would be his style, after all. And speaking of Khorne, flashes of purple and violet clouds began forming in the Fenris system. Just as I was torching some chaos altar in the depths of the cavern cities. It appeared my prediction was correct once more. The chaos was coming out to play. I hate it when I'm right. I mean, it's great to be able to predict the future and outmaneuver your enemies with better positioning and prepared defenses. But the chaos forces had their own gods and seers on their side. They came here to win, and came prepared as well. Even as my fleet began firing on the emerging warp portals, and closing some of them with cataclysmic levels of firepower, the space above Fenris distorted and gigantic demon engines called Silver_Tower_of_Zionch began to emerge, shielded from nearly every weapon we could fire at them. Wolves, have every ship docked at the Fang depart right now and hold Vox silence, I commanded just as my fleet turned all sensors to autistic mode. I have tried to instruct the wolves how to maintain information security and provided them with advice and technical specifications for switching off active Auspex sensors, but maintaining comm discipline wasn't something that came naturally to humans. We are a gregarious species after all, eager to shout insults and threats at our enemies and friends alike. Plus the space wolves were all alpha predators, and resisted any order by default, and sheer stubbornness. Don't teach me how to suck eggs, you intruders. A space wolves captain replied right back at me. I sighed inward and ejected his corrupted intruders into the sun before they could damage the battle barge too much. At least a dozen of those Silver Tower constructs were dimensionally shielded, which pretty much ensured that Fenris would suffer greatly until I managed to destroy the things with overwhelming firepower. 100 more Silver Towers were not so well shielded though, and I began inserting plasma warheads right in, torching the Chaos Wizards hidden inside as magic artillery, before hurling the things into the sun. At the same time, I extracted the feral locals from the surface of Fenris into the labyrinth, to prevent their bodies and souls being used as fuel for chaos sorcery. The Fang itself was heavily protected with armor, shields and defense batteries so it could take care of itself quite well. The defense lasers targeted the shielded Silver Towers with battleship strength beams, even managing to core one of them with the aid of their defense fleet and orbital forts. But the worst was yet to come. The moon of Fenris called Valdemani held an astropathic relay filled with psychers, and that was the main target of the invasion. A greater demon emerged from the warp rift and battered aside the volley of lance batteries and the hail of nova shells with contempt, before crushing his way inside the astropath station. I managed to grab most astropaths but not all of them. At least a dozen were left behind as a psychic howl transformed into a warp shield around the base, preventing the Tesseract from interacting with that region of space. Damn it. Why couldn't the invaders be orcs? Orcs were so much simpler. I say that, but high-level orcs were just as dangerous, once they began creating battle moons and warp highways. And I suspected their warfield held even more potent weapons from the old one's arsenal. "We are not attacking?" Ambly asked in a soft voice, watching the invasion unfold with trepidation. "There is more to come, Inquisitor. If a greater demon can emerge, other guests should be able to enter the Materium, soon," I muttered with my eyes closed, as I leaned into the command chair. It didn't take long either. Just as the Dark Angels and their fleet began firing at the Silver Towers and some of their battle brothers descended on Valdmani to engage that bloodthirsty demon, 100 more warp rifts opened in the system. An entire Chaos Armada poured through, from trillions of demons and billions of armed cultists, mutants, Xenos of a dozen races, traitor marines and heretic tech priests, corrupted titans and knights and worse. Fallen Primarch Lorga himself, on board a Gloriana battleship, with his word-bearers and a cohort of traitor warbands and chaos lords, millions of demon engines and even a handful of demon princes, heading directly for me and ignoring the juicier targets in the system. The Dark Angels rocking the Lion Primarch were engaged by another Chaos fleet, led by Primarch Angron and his World Eaters, plus another giant wave of demons and assorted followers. And lastly, Magnus the Red leading his 1,000 sons, escorted by Araman and his Rubicae Scarab Marines descended upon Fenris with furious warp spells and a blackstone fortress of their own. "Now this is a target-rich environment indeed," I whispered in amazement. It was also quite a bit more than I expected. An Emperor-damned Black Crusade, right on top of me and my sons. "Focus, Lord Pef. These invaders must be what you were waiting for, right?" Inquisitor Vale demanded in a harsh voice, while the bridge crew snickered at my words. "Quite so, my dear Inquisitor. Our reinforcements should arrive as well, but I'll hold the line until then," I explained in calm voice. With a mental push, the Black Lament began charging its Immaterium beam, dialed at half strength. Meanwhile, the Singularity battleship sped down and away, preparing for a black hole shot. Even with Jokero adjustments, the energy drain on its systems will only allow a single shot before the capacitors needed to regenerate, so best make the most use of it. "Go for a triple shot when you can, Larisa," I whispered in my daughter's mind, while indicating the wanted targets. "I'm not that lucky, Dad. Settle for 2 and hope I don't miss," Larisa grumbled back, and I slumped in defeat. Perhaps a triple shot was wishful thinking. So, I marked the 2 Gloriana battleships as the main targets and unleashed my Tyrannid army on Magnus and his 1,000 sons. It wasn't like Fenris would emerge intact from this adventure anyway. Already volcanoes were erupting and the seas were boiling under the corrupted Primarch's assault on the Space Wolves' home world. 200 cruiser-sized Tyrannid bioships crashed on top of the Fenris attackers, and disgorged their billions of hungry biologic war engines, including nearly 1,000 of Tyrannid biotitans. That should keep Magnus busy for some time, even with all his Alpha Plus Psycho powers. "Lancefire, I've come for your head." A giant howl emerged from the grotesque form of Lorga, as the idiot climbed on top of his warship to brandish a black sword at my battle station. I mean, he was safe inside the dimensional shield of his battleship, so why come out? Was he urging his navigators to drive closer, so he could hit me with his sword? Very likely. Then again, logical reasoning was a rare quality among the denizens of this dark future, imperial or chaotic alike. I clenched my left fist, and the cretin joined the labyrinth prison beside his brothers, Mortarion and Perturabo. A second later, a pinprick of concentrated gravity fired from the Void Claw on board the Singularity, crushing Lorga's battleship, his fleet and surrounding demons, and all of his corrupted marines into space dust, before continuing onwards and doing the same to Angron's fleet and followers. Amazingly though, half of the second Gloriana remained mostly intact, possibly because the Void Claw had expended most energy by breaching the dimensional field around Lorga's battleship. Didn't matter all that much though, since half a ship would not protect the insane Primarch from my reach. Angron vanished into the Tesseract as well, appearing into a straitjacket made of phase iron and Tyrannid chitin. Clever play, Lamenter. I see you are just as tricky as Araman has told me. Magnus the Red spoke directly into my mind, despite me holding the empathic nullstaff in my left hand. I would have become a vegetable without it, most likely. Damn psykers and their cheat codes. In response, I fired the Black Lament's beam at the other Blackstone fortress, the Black Immaterium beam snuffing out all the souls in its path, demons and cultists alike, and reducing the valued artifact to a flying coffin filled with dead corpses. Sadly, it was still surrounded by a dark Mechonicus dimensional field, but now nobody could enter the Will of Eternity anymore. Without a living crew to lower the shield, not even Magnus could make use of the fortress. And right after this, the cavalry arrived. First, an Eldar fleet led by an avatar of Cain, keeping a safe distance from human ships and forts while blasting away at demons and chaos traitors from thousands of energy guns and bright lances. Advanced torpedoes and missiles, space fighters and bombers unleashed fury on the Chaos forces, and the Avatar himself powering a giant golden beam to strike at the Chaos Silver Towers. Then, the rest of the Space Wolves fleet arrived, led by their Great Wolf himself, Logan Grimner, and escorted by a Grey Knight's cruiser. I wasn't expecting much from them anyway, but any help was welcome right now. And lastly, Janice and her Adeptus Auroritas arrived with a legion of Sisters of Battle, plus her Silent Sisters, a fleet of Mechonicus warships and a dozen rogue traders allied to my house. Now the balance of power was restored, and I felt confident to begin the next phase.